In a quiet village tucked between mist-shrouded mountains, life moves slowly, untouched by the chaos of the outside world. But for Kael, a young herbalist with a knack for uncovering secrets, the discovery of an ancient map hidden within a crumbling tome would change everything. The map speaks of the hidden realm, a place whispered about in legends, a land said to hold the power to restore balance to a dying world. Yet, as Kael sets out on this perilous journey, dark forces stir in the shadows, drawn by the same promise of power. The stakes couldn't be higher. Failure could mean the end of their world, but the path to salvation might demand more than Kael is willing to give. What awaits in the hidden realm? And what price must be paid to reach it? This is the story of a journey that will test courage, unravel mysteries, and challenge the very fabric of destiny. Kael stood at the edge of the village, his satchel filled with herbs, bandages, and the ancient map that had set his life on this new course. He knew the journey ahead would demand more than supplies. It would require allies. That's when he found Lyra, a seasoned warrior with a sharp tongue and a sharper blade. Her skepticism was palpable. She had seen too many legends crumble into dust to believe in one now. Yet, something in Kael's quiet determination caught her attention. Or perhaps it was the glimmer of hope she thought she'd buried long ago. Reluctantly, she agreed to join him, though her mistrust of the map and its promises lingered like a shadow. Their first test came quickly, the Whispering Gorge, a jagged chasm where the wind didn't just howl, it spoke. Voices echoed through the canyon, weaving tales of failure, regret, and fear. Each step forward seemed to amplify the doubts in their minds. Lyra's resolve wavered, her voice cutting through the eerie whispers. "This is madness," she said, her hand gripping her sword. "We're chasing a fairy tale, and this gorge is just the first trap." Kael, though shaken, stood firm. His belief in the map's truth was unshakable, a quiet fire that refused to be extinguished by the wind's cruel taunts. But it wasn't just his faith that carried them through. When a crumbling path threatened to send them tumbling into the abyss, Kael hesitated, only for Lyra to step in, her instincts sharper than the gorge's edges. "Trust me," she said, her voice steady despite the chaos. And for the first time, Kael did. That moment of trust, fragile as it was, began to bridge the gap between them. As they emerged from the gorge, the whispers fading behind them, Lyra's skepticism softened, if only slightly. She still doubted the map, but Kael's resolve had planted a seed of curiosity in her. What if, just this once, the legend was true? Yet as they caught their breath, neither noticed the figure watching from a distant ridge. Cloaked in shadows, the stranger's gaze followed their every move, a silent reminder that the road to the hidden realm was not theirs alone to tread. The journey had only just begun, and greater dangers loomed on the horizon, waiting to test their bond and their courage in ways neither could yet imagine. The journey led Kael and Lyra to the ruins of an ancient temple, its crumbling stone arches standing like sentinels against the sky. Vines snaked through the cracks, and the air was thick with the scent of moss and decay. Kael moved forward with purpose, his fingers tracing the weathered carvings on the walls. He paused at a large stone slab, its surface etched with symbols that seemed to pulse faintly in the dim light. "This is it," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. The inscription points to the next part of the journey. It's written in a language I've only seen in fragments before. Lyra lingered behind, her arms crossed and her gaze distant. The temple's oppressive silence stirred memories she had tried to bury. Memories of a mission gone wrong, of lives lost because she had trusted too easily. Her hand instinctively went to the hilt of her sword, as if grounding herself in the present. "Decipher it quickly," she muttered. "This place gives me no comfort." As Kael worked, the tension between them grew. Lyra's growing reliance on his optimism gnawed at her. She had always been the one to rely on logic, on cold, hard facts. Yet here she was, following a dreamer into the unknown. The weight of her doubts pressed down, threatening to crack her resolve. Suddenly, the ground beneath them shifted. A trap, concealed for centuries, sprang to life. Stone blocks groaned as they began to collapse, and a section of the floor gave way. Lyra's reflexes kicked in, but not fast enough. A falling fragment struck her shoulder, sending her stumbling. Kael reacted without hesitation, grabbing her arm and pulling her to safety, just as the ground where she had stood crumbled away. Breathless and shaken, they retreated to a safer part of the temple. Lyra winced as she inspected her injury, her pride wounded more than her body. Kael, ever the healer, reached for his satchel. "Let me help," he said, his voice steady. Lyra hesitated, then nodded, her usual defiance muted by pain and exhaustion. As he tended to her wound, the silence between them grew heavier. Lyra broke it first. "You're too quick to trust," she said, her tone sharp but not unkind. "One misstep, and we both pay the price." Kael's hands paused for a moment. "And you're too quick to doubt," he replied softly. "Sometimes trust is the only way forward." Her eyes met his, and for a moment, the walls she had built seemed to waver. But before she could respond, Kael's gaze shifted to her armor. A strange symbol, partially obscured by dirt and wear, caught his attention. He wiped away the grime, revealing a marking that matched the one on the map. His breath caught. "Lyra, where did you get this?" She frowned, looking down at the symbol. "It's been there as long as I've had the armor." "Why?" Kael's mind raced. The coincidence was too great to ignore. Could Lyra have some connection to the hidden realm? Or was this just another twist in the labyrinth of their journey? The questions hung in the air, unanswered. As they rested in the temple's shadowy embrace, the weight of their discoveries pressed on them both. The road ahead was uncertain, but one thing was clear. Their bond, forged in trust and tested by danger, would be the key to surviving whatever lay beyond. And yet, the symbol on Lyra's armor whispered of secrets yet to be uncovered, secrets that might change everything. The dense forest of echoes loomed before them, its canopy so thick it seemed to swallow the sky. Every step deeper into the woods was met with the unsettling sensation that the trees themselves were alive, watching, waiting. The air was heavy with the scent of damp earth and pine, and the faint hum of whispers seemed to emanate from every direction. Kael adjusted his satchel, his fingers brushing against the map, as if to reassure himself it was still there. Lyra strode beside him, her hand never far from her sword, her eyes scanning the shadows for threats. The forest was unnerving, but what waited within would test them in ways they hadn't yet imagined. It wasn't long before they were confronted by the forest's guardians. a tribe of enigmatic figures draped in cloaks of woven leaves and bark. Their faces were painted with patterns that seemed to shift in the dappled light, and their eyes glinted with a mix of curiosity and suspicion. The leader stepped forward, a tall figure with antlers protruding from their hood. "The forest does not grant passage lightly," they intoned, their voice echoing as if carried by the wind. "What do you offer in exchange for safe travel?" Kael, ever the diplomat, stepped forward with a respectful bow. "We carry no wealth, but I offer my knowledge of healing herbs and remedies. I can teach your people to treat ailments and strengthen their health." The guardians murmured among themselves, their expressions unreadable. Lyra, however, was less patient. "We don't have time for this," she muttered, her hand tightening on her sword. "We're on a mission that could save the world. Surely that's worth more than a few lessons." Her words hung in the air, sharp and unyielding. The Guardian's leader turned their gaze to her, their expression hardening. Kael shot her a warning look, but the damage was done. The tension thickened, and for a moment it seemed conflict was inevitable. Then a young Guardian stepped forward, their voice cutting through the silence. "I will vouch for them," they said, their tone firm. The others turned to the speaker, a young woman named Tarin, her face marked with the same shifting patterns as the rest, but her eyes held a spark of defiance. "Their quest aligns with the forest's will. Let me guide them." The tribe's leader studied Tarin for a long moment before nodding. "Very well, but remember, Tarin, the forest's whispers are not to be ignored. Should they lead you astray, the consequences will be yours to bear." With that, the guardians melted back into the trees, leaving the trio to continue their journey. Tarin's presence brought a new dynamic to the group. She moved through the forest with an ease that bordered on grace, her knowledge of the terrain proving invaluable. Yet her arrival stirred unease in Lyra, who found herself increasingly sidelined. Where once she had been Kael's sole protector, now Tarin seemed to fill that role effortlessly. The young guardian's confidence grated on Lyra, and her quiet suggestions to Kael only deepened the rift. "She doesn't know the dangers we've faced," Lyra muttered under her breath, her pride stinging with every step. As they ventured deeper, the forest's whispers grew louder, more insistent. Kael paused, his brow furrowed. "Do you hear that?" he asked, his voice barely audible over the eerie hum. "It's not just the wind, it's something else." Tarin nodded grimly. "The forest does not speak without reason. It warns of danger, danger that may already be tracking us." Lyra scoffed, though unease flickered in her eyes. "More riddles, just what we need." But Kael's instincts told him otherwise. The whispers weren't just warnings. They were a presence, something ancient and malevolent that moved just beyond sight. He glanced at Tarin, who met his gaze with a solemn nod. Whatever was out there, it was no ordinary threat. The group pressed on, the tension between them growing with each step. Lyra's frustration simmered beneath the surface, her trust in Kael warring with her mistrust of Tarin. Yet as the whispers grew louder, even she couldn't ignore the sense that they were no longer alone. The forest had become a labyrinth of shadows and secrets, and the true test of their unity was yet to come. The dense canopy of the Forest of Echoes finally gave way to open sky, but what lay beyond was no relief. The group emerged to find a vast, desolate wasteland stretching endlessly before them. Cracked earth stretched to the horizon, broken only by jagged rock formations that jutted out like the bones of some long-dead beast. The air was dry and lifeless, carrying with it a faint, acrid smell that made breathing feel like a chore. Kael unrolled the map, his fingers tracing the path that led straight through this barren expanse. "This is the way," he said, his voice steady but tinged with unease. "The next landmark lies beyond the wasteland." Lyra stepped forward, her sharp eyes scanning the bleak landscape. "This place feels wrong," she said, her tone edged with suspicion. "There's a reason people call it cursed. We should find another route." Her voice carried the weight of experience, the kind of caution born from years of navigating danger. But Kael shook his head, his gaze fixed on the map. "There's no time," he replied. "Every moment we waste, our world decays a little more. I've seen it in my dreams. Villages crumbling, fields turning to ash. We can't afford to turn back now." The argument hung in the air, heavy and unresolved. Tarin, silent until now, stepped between them. "The wasteland is dangerous, but not impassable," she said, her voice calm. "If we move quickly and stay together, we can cross it." Her words carried a quiet authority, but Lyra's skepticism remained. And what happens when the curse takes hold? She shot back. "You think your forest tricks will protect us out here?" Tarin met her gaze without flinching. "I don't have all the answers," she admitted. "But I know this path is our only chance." Reluctantly, Lyra agreed, though her hand never strayed far from her sword. As they stepped onto the cracked earth, the wasteland seemed to come alive in a way that defied logic. The air shimmered with heat, and distant shapes flickered at the edges of their vision, shadows that moved when no one was there. It wasn't long before the hallucinations began. Kael was the first to falter. One moment, he was walking beside Lyra. The next, he was back in his village, surrounded by flames. The familiar faces of his neighbors twisted in agony as the buildings collapsed around them. He reached out, desperate to save them, but his hands passed through the smoke and ash. "This isn't real," he whispered, though the words felt hollow. The vision shook him to his core, planting a seed of doubt he couldn't shake. Lyra, too, found herself ensnared by the wasteland's illusions. The air around her thickened, and the ghostly figures of her fallen comrades materialized, their faces etched with accusation. "You left us," one of them hissed, their voice echoing in her mind. "You survived, but at what cost?" She clenched her fists, her jaw tight. "I did what I had to do," she growled, though the words did little to silence the voices. The weight of her guilt pressed down, threatening to crush her resolve. Tarin, however, seemed less affected by the hallucinations. Her connection to the land gave her a clarity the others lacked. She moved with purpose, her eyes scanning the ground as though searching for something only she could see. "This way," she called, her voice cutting through the haze. She led them to a narrow path, hidden beneath a layer of dust and gravel. "This route will take us through the heart of the wasteland," she explained. "But it comes at a cost. The land will drain us our strength, our energy. We'll be vulnerable." Kael nodded, though his face was pale from the ordeal. "We don't have a choice," he said. "We have to keep moving." Lyra hesitated, her eyes flicking between Kael and Tarin. For the first time, she felt a pang of something unfamiliar, doubt in her own judgment. Reluctantly, she followed, her grip on her sword tightening as they ventured deeper into the wasteland. The path was treacherous, each step sapping their strength. The air grew colder, and the hallucinations returned with a vengeance. Kael's resolve wavered as the visions of his village's destruction played on a loop in his mind. Lyra's guilt gnawed at her, the ghosts of her past refusing to let her go. Even Tarin, usually so composed, began to show signs of strain. Her connection to the land, once a source of strength, now felt like a burden, the weight of the Wasteland's curse pressing down on her. Yet, despite the toll it took, the hidden path brought them closer to their goal. The desolation began to thin, and in the distance, the faint outline of the next landmark appeared, a towering spire of black stone, its peak lost in the clouds. Kael's heart leapt at the sight, but his relief was short-lived. The wasteland had left them battered and vulnerable, their strength all but spent, and as they approached the spire, they couldn't shake the feeling that their greatest challenges were still ahead. The road to the hidden realm was far from over, and the price of their journey was only beginning to reveal itself. The wasteland had drained them to their very limits. Each step felt heavier than the last, their bodies aching from the relentless strain of the journey. Kael's vision blurred, the spire they had been following now a distant, wavering mirage. Lyra's breathing came in ragged gasps, her sword dragging behind her like an anchor. Even Tarin, usually so resilient, moved with a sluggishness that betrayed her exhaustion. Just when it seemed they could go no further, the landscape shifted. The cracked earth gave way to a lush, verdant oasis, a stark, almost surreal contrast to the desolation they had endured. The sight of water and greenery was enough to reignite a flicker of hope. Kael stumbled forward, his parched throat aching for relief. But as they approached, a figure emerged from the shadows of the trees, a hermit, cloaked in ragged robes that seemed to blend with the foliage. His face was weathered, his eyes deep pools of wisdom and sorrow. He raised a hand, not in greeting, but in warning. "You are not the first to seek refuge here," he said, his voice low and gravelly. "But know this, the path you tread is guarded by forces beyond your comprehension." Kael, ever the seeker of knowledge, stepped forward, his exhaustion momentarily forgotten. "What do you mean? What guards the hidden realm?" The hermit's gaze bore into him, piercing and unsettling. "A being of immense power," he replied. "It feeds on doubt, on fear. It will test your resolve in ways you cannot imagine." His words hung in the air, heavy with implication. Kael's brow furrowed, his mind racing. "How do you know so much about it?" He pressed. The hermit's lips curled into a faint, almost sad smile. "Because, young one, I once sought what you seek, and I failed." The admission was like a blow, striking at the heart of Kael's determination. Lyra, however, was less impressed. She stepped forward, her hand resting on the hilt of her sword. "We don't have time for riddles," she snapped. "If this place is dangerous, we should leave." Now, Kael hesitated, torn between Lyra's pragmatism and the hermit's cryptic warnings. "We need to know what we're walking into," he argued. "Ignorance could cost us everything." Lyra's eyes flashed with frustration. "And staying here could cost us our lives," she shot back. The tension between them was palpable, their differing priorities driving a wedge deeper into their fragile alliance. The hermit watched them silently, his expression unreadable. After a long moment, he turned and gestured toward a small, sheltered clearing. "Rest here," he said. "The oasis will restore your strength. But know this, the amulet I give you may shield you from the entity's influence, but it cannot protect you from yourselves." From within his robes, he produced a small, intricately carved amulet, its surface gleaming faintly in the sunlight. He pressed it into Kael's hand, his grip firm. "Use it wisely," he murmured, "for the road ahead will demand more than courage. It will demand truth." Kael stared at the amulet, its weight both physical and symbolic. Lyra's distrust of the hermit only grew, her instincts screaming that this was a trap. But Kael's curiosity had been ignited, and he refused to leave without answers. As they settled in the clearing, the rift between them widened, their shared exhaustion doing little to bridge the gap. The hermit's words echoed in Kael's mind, a haunting reminder that the journey was not just about saving the world. It was about confronting the truths within themselves. And as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows over the oasis, none of them could shake the feeling that the greatest challenges were still to come. The towering Obsidian Gate loomed before them, its surface shimmering like liquid midnight. Carved into its surface were intricate symbols that pulsed faintly, as if alive. The air around it was thick with an otherworldly energy, a hum that resonated deep in their bones. Kael approached first, his hand instinctively reaching for the amulet the hermit had given him. It glowed faintly, its light flickering in rhythm with the symbols on the gate. "This is it," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "The entrance to the hidden realm." Before they could take another step, the air shifted. A spectral figure materialized before the gate, its form shifting between solid and ethereal. Its eyes glowed with an unnerving light, and its voice echoed with a resonance that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. "You seek passage," it intoned, not as a question, but as a statement. "But the hidden realm is not for the unworthy. Prove yourselves, or turn back and face the consequences." Lyra stepped forward, her hand tightening on her sword. "We've come too far to be stopped by riddles," she said, her voice sharp with defiance. The entity's gaze turned to her, its expression unreadable. "Defiance alone will not open the gate," it replied. "Your trials begin now." The first trial was a test of unity. The entity conjured an illusion, separating them into isolated visions. Kael found himself standing in a field of dying crops, the villagers he had sworn to protect withering before his eyes. The weight of their suffering pressed down on him, a stark reminder of his purpose. Lyra, meanwhile, was thrust into a battlefield, surrounded by the ghosts of her past. Each fallen comrade stared at her with accusing eyes, their voices a chorus of blame. Tarin faced her own challenge, a vision of the forest she called home, consumed by flames. The trials were designed to break them, to force them to confront their deepest fears and regrets. But it was the second trial that proved the most devastating. The entity turned its gaze to Kael, its voice cutting through the illusions like a knife. "You carry the blood of those who once sought to claim the hidden realm for their own," it declared. "Your ancestors were not heroes, but conquerors. Their greed nearly destroyed this realm, and now you stand here, seeking what they could not take." The words struck Kael like a physical blow. He staggered back, his mind reeling. "That's not possible," he whispered, his voice trembling. "I'm just a healer. I'm not one of them." But the entity's words rang with undeniable truth, and the weight of his lineage settled heavily on his shoulders. Lyra's reaction was immediate. Her skepticism turned to outright hostility, her distrust of Kael flaring anew. "You lied to us," she accused, her voice cold. "This whole time, you've been chasing your own agenda." Kael shook his head, desperate to explain. "I didn't know," he said, his voice breaking. "I swear I didn't know." But the damage was done. The revelation had shattered the fragile trust between them, and the group stood divided at the very moment they needed unity the most. The final trial was the most harrowing. The entity gestured to the amulet in Kael's hand. "To prove your worth, you must sacrifice that which binds you to your past," it said. "Only then will the gate open." Kael hesitated, his fingers tightening around the amulet. It was more than a tool. It was a symbol of his journey, his hope, his connection to the Hermit's wisdom. But as he looked at the gate, at the path that could save his world, he knew what he had to do. With a deep breath, he placed the amulet on the ground before the gate. The moment it left his hand, the symbols on the gate flared to life, their light blinding. The amulet dissolved into a swirl of energy, its power merging with the gate. Slowly, the massive doors began to creak open, revealing a swirling vortex of light and shadow. The entity's voice echoed one last time as the gate unlocked. "You have proven your worth, but know this. The hidden realm is not a place of salvation. It is a mirror, reflecting the truths you cannot outrun. What you find within will test you more than any trial." With that, the spectral figure dissolved into the air, leaving them standing before the open gate. As they stepped through, the weight of the entity's words lingered. The path ahead was uncertain, and the revelations had left them fractured. But one thing was clear: the journey was far from over, and the hidden realm would demand more than they had yet given. The moment they stepped through the vortex, the world around them transformed. The hidden realm was nothing like the legends had described. It was more. The air shimmered with an iridescent glow, and the ground beneath their feet was soft, almost alive, as if it pulsed with a quiet rhythm. Towering crystal spires rose in the distance, their surfaces refracting light into a kaleidoscope of colors. Strange, luminous plants swayed gently in a breeze that carried the faint scent of something sweet and unfamiliar. For a moment, the sheer beauty of it all left them speechless, their exhaustion momentarily forgotten. But the tranquility didn't last. As they ventured deeper, the air grew colder, and the shadows that clung to the edges of the realm began to stir. At first, it was just a flicker of movement, something barely noticeable out of the corner of the eye. Then, without warning, the shadows lunged. Dark, shapeless creatures with glowing red eyes emerged from the gloom, their forms shifting and writhing as if made of liquid darkness. They moved with unnatural speed, their claws slashing through the air with a hiss. Kael's instincts kicked in, but his movements were sluggish, still weighed down by the revelations at the gate. He shouted for the others to stay close, his voice tinged with urgency. Lyra, however, needed no instructions. She stepped forward, her sword flashing in the eerie light as she met the creature's head on. Her strikes were precise, each motion calculated to drive the shadows back. Yet even as she fought, her anger simmered beneath the surface. "This is your doing," she snapped at Kael, her voice cutting through the chaos. "You brought us here, and now we're paying the price." Kael flinched at her words, but there was no time to argue. The creatures seemed to grow stronger the more fear and doubt they fed on, their forms swelling with every strike. Tarin, standing at the edge of the fray, closed her eyes and extended her hands. A soft, green light emanated from her, and the ground beneath the creatures began to shift. Vines erupted from the earth, tangling around the shadows and slowing their advance. "This way," she called, her voice barely audible over the din. "We can't fight them here." They retreated, the creatures hot on their heels. Kael's mind raced, trying to make sense of the chaos. He had expected the hidden realm to be a place of answers, of salvation, but instead, they were met with danger and betrayal from the realm itself and from within their own group. As they ran, one of the creatures lunged at him, its claws grazing his side before Lyra's blade intercepted it. The pain was sharp, but it was the look in Lyra's eyes that cut deeper. She had saved him, but her resentment was plain. When they finally found a moment of respite, hidden in the hollow of a massive crystal structure, Kael slumped against the wall, clutching his wounded side. Tarin knelt beside him, her hands glowing softly as she began to heal the injury. Lira stood guard at the entrance, her back to them, her posture tense. The silence between them was heavy, broken only by the faint hum of the realm around them. Kael closed his eyes, his thoughts spiraling. The entity's words at the gate haunted him, and now the realm itself seemed to mock him. Was this truly a place of hope, or had they been lured into a trap? The beauty of the hidden realm was undeniable, but beneath its surface lay something darker, something that seemed to thrive on their fear and doubt. He glanced at Tarin, who was focused on her task, her expression unreadable. "What do you think this place is?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Tarin paused, her hands still glowing. "I don't know," she admitted, "but it's not what I expected. The land here, it feels alive, but not in the way I'm used to. It's like it's watching us, testing us." Her words sent a chill through him. If the realm itself was against them, how could they hope to succeed? Lyra's voice broke the silence, sharp and bitter. "We should never have come here," she said, her tone final. "This was a mistake, and now we're stuck in a place that wants us dead." Kael wanted to argue, to defend his choices, but the weight of her words was too much to bear. The rift between them grew wider with every passing moment, and he wasn't sure how to bridge it. As Tarin finished tending to his wound, Kael's gaze drifted to the horizon, where the crystal spires gleamed like beacons. The hidden realm was a place of wonders, yes, but also of secrets that might hold the key to their survival, or their undoing. For now, all they could do was press forward, even as the shadows closed in, and the realm's true nature began to reveal itself. The journey was far from over, and the cost of their choices was only beginning to unfold. As the group pressed deeper into the hidden realm, the shimmering landscape began to shift once more. The towering crystal spires gave way to a village unlike anything they had ever seen. The structures were translucent, glowing faintly as if carved from moonlight itself. Figures moved among them, ethereal beings with luminous skin, and eyes that seemed to hold the depth of centuries. They moved with an otherworldly grace, their presence both calming and unnerving. One of the beings stepped forward, their voice a melodic hum that resonated in the air. "You have come far," they said, their gaze locking onto Kael. "But your arrival brings both hope and peril." The words sent a ripple of unease through the group. Kael stepped forward, his voice steady despite the growing weight of uncertainty. "We're here to save our world," he said. "If there's anything you can tell us about this place, we need to know." The being's expression softened, but there was a sorrow in their eyes that spoke of burdens too heavy to bear. "This realm is not what you believe," they replied. "It is a prison, one built to contain an ancient evil that threatened all existence. And it was your ancestors, Kael, who helped forge the seal that binds it." The revelation struck like a thunderclap. Kael's breath caught in his throat, his mind reeling. "My ancestors," he repeated, the words tasting bitter on his tongue. The being nodded solemnly. "Their blood runs in your veins, and with it, their connection to the seal. Your presence here has weakened it, allowing the evil's influence to seep through. The shadow creatures you've faced are but fragments of its power, growing stronger with each passing moment." Lyra's reaction was immediate. She turned on Kael, her eyes blazing with accusation. "You led us here knowing this," she demanded, her voice sharp with anger. "This isn't a quest to save the world. It's a disaster of your making." Kael shook his head, his hands raised in a desperate plea. "I didn't know," he said, his voice trembling. "I swear I had no idea, but the damage was done. The trust between them, already fragile, now hung by a thread." Tarin stepped forward, her calm demeanor a stark contrast to the tension crackling in the air. "Arguing won't fix this," she said, her voice firm. "If the seal is weakening, we need to act." Together, her words carried a quiet authority, but Lyra's skepticism remained. "And how do we know you're not part of this?" She shot back, her distrust spilling over. "You've been leading us just as much as he has." Kael, however, was already grappling with a deeper guilt. The weight of his lineage pressed down on him, a burden he hadn't asked for but now had to bear. "This is my responsibility," he said, his voice low but resolute. "I didn't choose this, but I won't run from it. If my presence is what's causing this, then I'll do whatever it takes to fix it." The ethereal being regarded him with a mix of pity and respect. "The path ahead is perilous," they warned. "To restore the seal, you must confront the heart of the evil itself. It will test you in ways you cannot imagine, feeding on your fears and doubts. But if you succeed, the seal can be reforged and the realm restored to balance." The gravity of the task settled over them like a storm cloud. Lyra's anger still simmered, but beneath it was a flicker of something else, reluctant acknowledgement of Kael's resolve. Tarin, ever the mediator, placed a hand on Kael's shoulder. "We'll face it together," she said, her voice steady. "But we need to move quickly. Every moment we delay, the evil grows stronger." Kael nodded, his determination hardening. The road ahead was fraught with danger, and the stakes had never been higher. But as they prepared to venture deeper into the heart of the hidden realm, one truth became clear. This was no longer just a quest to save their world. It was a battle against the darkness within themselves, and the choices they made would shape not only their fate, but the fate of everything they held dear. The group moved deeper into the hidden realm, their path illuminated by the faint glow of the ethereal beings who had offered them guidance. The air around them seemed to hum with an ancient energy, as if the very ground beneath their feet remembered the battles fought long ago. Kael walked in silence, his thoughts consumed by the revelations of his lineage. His ancestors, both heroes and villains, had played a pivotal role in sealing away the ancient evil that now threatened to break free. The weight of their choices pressed heavily on him, a legacy he hadn't asked for but couldn't escape. As they traveled, the realm began to reveal its secrets. Strange, shimmering fragments of memory floated in the air, like shards of glass catching the light. Kael reached out to one, and it dissolved into his hand, flooding his mind with a vision. He saw his ancestors standing at the heart of a great battle, wielding powers beyond comprehension. They were both saviors and destroyers, their actions driven by a mix of desperation and ambition. The vision ended abruptly, leaving Kael breathless and shaken. They weren't just sealing the evil, he murmured, his voice barely audible. They were trying to control it. Lyra, walking a few paces behind, caught the edge of his words. Her jaw tightened, her mistrust of Kael flaring anew. "And now you're following in their footsteps," she said, her tone sharp. "How do we know you're not just repeating their mistakes?" Her words hung in the air, heavy with accusation. Kael turned to face her, his expression a mix of frustration and guilt. "I'm not them," he said, his voice steady but strained. "I don't want power. I just want to fix this." But Lyra wasn't convinced. The weight of the journey, the constant danger, and now the revelations about Kael's past had pushed her to her limit. For a moment, she considered walking away, leaving the quest and Kael behind. The thought was tempting, a way to escape the chaos and betrayal that seemed to follow them at every turn. Yet as she turned to leave, something stopped her. It wasn't logic or duty, but the brief flash of vulnerability she had seen in Kael's eyes. Against her better judgment, she stayed, though the tension between them remained as thick as the shadows closing in around them. The shadow creatures, emboldened by the weakening seal, attacked with a ferocity they hadn't shown before. Their forms twisted and writhed, their glowing eyes piercing through the gloom. The group fought back, their movements fueled by desperation. Kael's knowledge of herbs and remedies proved invaluable as he worked to heal their wounds, while Lyra's skill with a blade kept the creatures at bay. Tarin, ever the silent force, used her connection to the land to manipulate the terrain, creating barriers and traps to slow their pursuers. Yet, even as they fought together, the strain between them was palpable. Each strike, each word, carried the weight of their unresolved conflicts. It was during one particularly brutal skirmish that the cracks began to show. A shadow creature lunged at Lyra, its claws inches from her throat. Kael, acting on instinct, shoved her out of the way, taking the brunt of the attack himself. The creature's claws raked across his chest, and he stumbled back, blood staining his tunic. For a moment, Lyra froze, her anger and mistrust warring with something deeper, gratitude, perhaps, or a reluctant recognition of Kael's selflessness. She moved to his side, her hands instinctively reaching to stop the bleeding. "You're an idiot," she muttered, her voice rough but lacking its usual edge. Kael managed a weak smile, his breath coming in shallow gasps. "Maybe," he said, "but I couldn't let you get hurt." The moment was fleeting, broken by the sound of more creatures approaching. But something had shifted, however slightly. Lyra's resolve to stay with the group solidified, though her trust in Kael remained fragile. As they pressed on, the shadowy threats grew more relentless, forcing them to rely on each other in ways they hadn't before. The road ahead was uncertain, and the weight of their choices loomed large. But for now, they moved forward, bound together by necessity and the faint, fragile hope that they might still find a way to save their world. The heart of the hidden realm was a place of stark contrasts. A cavernous chamber bathed in an eerie, pulsing light, yet filled with a suffocating darkness that seemed to press in from all sides. At its center stood the seal, a massive, intricate structure etched with symbols that glowed faintly, though their light was fading fast. Cracks spiderwebbed across its surface, and from those cracks oozed a thick, shadowy substance that writhed like something alive. The air was thick with the scent of decay and the oppressive weight of an ancient, malevolent presence. It was here, in this place of both beauty and terror, that the group finally faced the truth of their mission. Kael stepped forward, his eyes fixed on the weakening seal. The realization hit him like a blow. Restoring it would require more than just skill or courage. It would demand a sacrifice. "One of us has to take the place of the ancestor who first sealed the evil," he said, his voice heavy with the weight of the revelation. "It's the only way to stabilize the seal." The words hung in the air, each syllable a grim reminder of the stakes. Lyra didn't hesitate. "I'll do it," she said, her voice firm and unyielding. She stepped forward, her hand resting on the hilt of her sword, as if ready to face the evil head-on. But Kael shook his head, his expression fierce. "No," he said. "If you take the place of the seal, it will destroy you. I won't let that happen." The tension between them crackled, their shared history of mistrust and loyalty colliding in the face of an impossible choice. Tarin, who had been silent until now, stepped between them. Her calm demeanor was a stark contrast to the chaos around them. "There might be another way," she said, her voice steady. "The realm itself holds immense power. If we channel that energy, we could strengthen the seal without sacrificing anyone." Her words offered a glimmer of hope, but the risks were clear. "But it's dangerous," she continued. "If we disrupt the balance of the realm, it could collapse, and we'd be trapped here, along with the evil we're trying to contain." The weight of the decision settled over them like a storm cloud. Kael glanced at Lyra, then at Tarin, his mind racing. Trusting Tarin's plan meant risking everything, not just their lives, but the fate of the realm itself. Yet the alternative was equally unthinkable. "We don't have a choice," he said finally, his voice filled with quiet resolve. "We have to try." With the decision made, they moved quickly. Tarin guided them to a series of crystalline nodes scattered throughout the chamber, each one pulsing with the realm's latent energy. "We need to activate these," she explained. "They'll amplify the power of the seal, but we'll have to do it simultaneously. Any mistake could destabilize the entire structure." The urgency in her voice was unmistakable, and the group spread out, each taking a node to activate. As Kael placed his hands on the node before him, he felt a surge of energy coursing through him, a strange mix of warmth and icy cold. The symbols on the seal began to glow brighter, the cracks slowly closing as the realm's power flowed into it. But the process was far from smooth. The shadowy substance oozing from the seal lashed out, tendrils of darkness snaking toward them as if trying to stop their efforts. Lyra was there in an instant, her blade flashing as she cut through the shadows. "Keep going," she shouted, her voice cutting through the chaos. "I'll hold them off." The chamber seemed to come alive, the walls trembling as the realm's energy surged. Kael's hands shook as he focused on the node, his mind racing with the consequences of their actions. If this failed, they would be sealing their own fate along with the evil. But failure wasn't an option. He could feel the weight of his ancestors' choices pressing down on him, their legacy both a burden and a guide. As the final node activated, the seal flared with a blinding light, the shadows retreating as the cracks sealed shut. For a moment, it seemed as though they had succeeded. But then the ground beneath them began to tremble violently, the crystalline nodes cracking under the strain. Tarin's voice rose above the chaos. "The realm's balance is shifting. We need to get out of here, now." The group turned and ran, the chamber collapsing around them as the realm's energy surged out of control. The path ahead was unclear, the once familiar landscape now twisted and unstable. As they sprinted toward the exit, Kael couldn't shake the feeling that they had only bought themselves a brief reprieve. The seal was restored, but the cost of their actions, and the true nature of the hidden realm, remained shrouded in uncertainty. The road ahead was still fraught with danger, and the choices they had made would echo far beyond the confines of the realm. The chamber trembled violently as the group prepared to enact Tarin's plan, the air thick with the oppressive weight of the ancient evil's presence. The shadows around them seemed to coil and twist, forming into a grotesque figure that loomed over them. Its voice echoed through the chamber, a chilling blend of mockery and malice. "You think you can undo what has been done?" it hissed, its glowing eyes fixed on Kael. "Your ancestors were fools to believe they could contain me, and now you follow in their footsteps, blind to the truth." The figure's words struck a nerve, and Kael felt a surge of unease. Before he could respond, the air around him shifted, and he was pulled into a vision. He saw his ancestors standing at the heart of the seal, their faces etched with desperation as they poured their power into the structure. But it wasn't just a noble act. It was a desperate gamble, one born of hubris and fear. The vision shifted, showing him the consequences of their actions. Entire worlds consumed by the evil they had tried to control. Kael stumbled back, the weight of the truth crashing down on him. "They didn't just seal you," he said, his voice trembling. "They unleashed you." The evil's laughter echoed through the chamber, a sound that sent shivers down their spines. "And now you stand here, trying to fix their mistakes," it sneered. "But you are no hero, Kael. You are their legacy, a legacy of failure." Lyra, standing nearby, felt the sting of the evil's words as well. The shadows around her shifted, and she was drawn into a vision of her own. She saw herself back on the battlefield, surrounded by the faces of those she had failed to save. Their voices echoed in her mind, filled with accusation and regret. "You left us," one of them whispered. "You chose to survive, but at what cost?" The temptation to undo her past mistakes was overwhelming, and for a moment she hesitated. But then she remembered the journey she had been on, the bonds she had formed, and the strength she had found in moving forward. With a fierce determination, she shook off the vision, her voice cutting through the chaos. "I won't let you twist my past into a weapon," she said, her tone defiant. "I've made my peace with it." Tarin, meanwhile, was focused on the task at hand. Her hands glowed faintly as she channeled the realm's energy, her connection to the land allowing her to tap into its power. But the process was excruciating, the energy coursing through her like fire. "I can't hold this much longer," she said through gritted teeth. "We need to act now." The group moved quickly, their unity their greatest strength. Kael, though shaken by the revelations about his lineage, stepped forward, his resolve unwavering. "We're not our ancestors," he said, his voice firm. "We can do this together." Lyra and Tarin nodded, their trust in each other solidifying in the face of the evil's taunts. But the ancient evil wasn't done yet. As the group worked to channel the realm's energy, the seal began to crack, the shadows surging forward with renewed force. The chamber shook violently, the walls starting to crumble as the realm's balance teetered on the edge of collapse. The evil's voice rose above the chaos, a final mocking taunt. "You cannot win," it said. "Your strength is nothing compared to the darkness within you." The group pressed on, their determination unyielding. Kael's hands glowed as he poured his energy into the seal, his connection to his ancestors both a burden and a source of strength. Lyra stood guard, her blade flashing as she fought off the shadowy tendrils that threatened to overwhelm them. Tarin, her face pale with exertion, continued to channel the realm's energy, her voice steady despite the strain. "We're almost there," she said, her words a lifeline in the chaos. But the cracks in the seal continued to spread, the evil's power surging with each passing moment. The group's unity was their greatest strength, but even their combined efforts might not be enough to stop the ancient evil. As the chamber shook and the shadows closed in, they knew one thing for certain: this was their final stand. The fate of the realm and their world hung in the balance. The chamber was a maelstrom of chaos, the air thick with the oppressive weight of the ancient evil's power. The seal, once a bastion of hope, now teetered on the brink of collapse, its cracks widening with every passing moment. Kael stood at the center of it all, his hands trembling as he channeled the realm's energy. But even as he poured his strength into the seal, he could feel it slipping away. The evil's laughter echoed in his mind, a relentless reminder of their desperate situation. "You cannot win," it taunted, its voice dripping with malice. "Your efforts are futile." Kael's gaze shifted to Lira and Tarin, their faces etched with exhaustion and determination. They had fought so hard, risked so much, and yet the seal continued to crumble. In that moment, clarity struck him like a lightning bolt. He knew what had to be done. "There's only one way," he said, his voice steady despite the turmoil around him. "I have to take the place of the ancestor who first sealed the evil. It's the only way to stabilize the seal." Lyra's eyes widened, her usual composure shattered. "No," she said, her voice sharp with disbelief. "You can't do this. We'll find another way." Her words were fierce, but beneath them was a flicker of desperation, a plea for him to reconsider. Tarin, too, stepped forward, her calm demeanor cracking under the weight of the revelation. Kael, this isn't the answer, she said, her voice urgent. There has to be another solution. But Kael shook his head, his resolve unshakable. There's no time, he said, his tone firm but gentle. If we don't act now, the seal will break, and everything we've fought for will be lost. This is my responsibility. My blood ties me to the seal, and I can't let that legacy destroy everything. His words hung in the air, heavy with finality. Before they could protest further, Kael stepped forward, his hands reaching out to the weakening seal. The moment his fingers touched its surface, a brilliant light erupted, enveloping him in its glow. The ancient evil's laughter turned to a roar of fury as its form began to dissolve, its power forced back into the prison it had sought to escape. The cracks in the seal began to close, the realm's energy stabilizing as Kael's essence merged with the structure. Lyra and Tarin could only watch in stunned silence as the light faded, leaving the chamber eerily still. The seal was whole once more, its surface glowing faintly with renewed strength. But Kael was gone, his presence now a part of the very fabric of the realm. The weight of his sacrifice settled over them like a shroud, their grief and guilt overshadowing the victory they had fought so hard to achieve. The ethereal beings emerged from the shadows, their luminous forms radiating a quiet gratitude. You have done what few could, one of them said, their voice a melodic hum. The realm is saved, and for that, we thank you. Their words were kind, but they offered little comfort. The cost of their success was too great, and the absence of Kael's presence was a wound too fresh to bear. Lyra stood frozen, her fists clenched at her sides. Anger and sorrow warred within her, a storm of emotions she couldn't contain. He didn't have to do this, she said, her voice trembling. We could have found another way. Tarin placed a hand on her shoulder, her expression a mix of grief and understanding. He believed it was the only way, she said softly, and now we have to honor that choice. The weight of their loss hung heavy in the air, a silent reminder of the sacrifices made in the name of saving the realm. The journey had tested them in ways they could never have imagined, and now, as they stood in the aftermath, they were left to grapple with the consequences. The road ahead was uncertain, but one thing was clear. Kael's sacrifice had changed everything, and the echoes of his choice would shape their paths in ways they were only beginning to understand. The ethereal beings led Lira and Tarin back through the shimmering pathways of the hidden realm, the air now calm and radiant with a purity it hadn't known before. The once oppressive shadows had retreated, replaced by a soft, golden light that seemed to emanate from the very earth itself. The beings moved with a serene grace, their luminous forms casting gentle glows as they guided the pair to their village. The structures of the village, translucent and glowing, stood as a testament to the realm's newfound balance. Yet, for Lyra, the beauty of it all felt hollow. Her mind was consumed by one question: what had become of Kael? As they entered the heart of the village, one of the beings stepped forward, their voice a soothing hum that carried both gratitude and sorrow. Kael's sacrifice has done more than restore the seal, they said. It has purified the realm, cleansing it of the evil's lingering taint. The balance has been restored, and for that, we are eternally grateful. The words should have brought comfort, but Lyra's heart remained heavy. Is he gone? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The being's expression softened, their luminous eyes filled with a quiet sadness. His essence is now a part of the realm, woven into its very fabric. In a sense, he is everywhere, and yet he is no longer with us as he once was. The finality of the statement struck Lyra like a blow. She had known, deep down, what Kael's choice would mean, but hearing it confirmed was another matter entirely. Her fists clenched at her sides, anger and grief warring within her. Tarin stood silently beside her, her own thoughts unreadable. After a long moment, the ethereal being spoke again. "We can guide you back to your world," they offered. "The path is open, and your people await you." Lyra hesitated, her gaze fixed on the horizon where the crystal spires gleamed. The thought of leaving without knowing Kael's fate, without seeing him one last time, felt unbearable. Yet she knew she couldn't stay. Her place was in the world they had fought so hard to save, a world that still needed her. Tarin, however, seemed to have reached a different conclusion. She turned to Lyra, her expression calm but resolute. "I'm going to stay," she said. "This realm, it feels like home now. There's work to be done here, rebuilding and protecting what Kael helped restore. I think this is where I'm meant to be." Lyra's initial reaction was one of surprise, but as she looked at Tarin, she understood. The young guardian had found a purpose here, a connection to the land that went beyond duty. It was a choice Lyra respected, even if it meant they would part ways. "You'll do well here," she said, her voice softer than usual. "Kael would be proud of you." Tarin nodded, a faint smile touching her lips. "And he'd be proud of you too," she replied. "Don't forget that." The moment of parting was bittersweet. Lyra watched as Tarin turned and walked toward the heart of the village, her figure blending seamlessly with the luminous landscape. The ethereal being who had spoken earlier approached Lyra once more. "The path to your world is ready," they said, "but know this, Kael's legacy lives on in you. Carry it with honor." Lyra took a deep breath, the weight of the journey settling on her shoulders. She had come to the hidden realm, seeking answers, and now she was leaving with more questions than ever. But one thing was certain, Kael's sacrifice would not be in vain. As she stepped onto the shimmering path that would lead her home, she made a silent vow. She would honor his memory by continuing to fight for their world, by protecting those who couldn't protect themselves, and by living the kind of life that would make him proud. The journey back was quiet, the realm's beauty now tinged with a sense of loss. Yet, as Lyra emerged into the familiar landscape of her world, she felt a flicker of hope. The road ahead would be long, and the scars of the journey would remain, but she was ready. For Kael, for Tarin, and for the countless lives that depended on her, she would carry on. The hidden realm had changed her in ways she couldn't yet fully understand, but one thing was clear, the fight wasn't over, and neither was she. As Lyra stepped back into her world, the changes were impossible to ignore. The air felt lighter, the skies clearer, and the land itself seemed to breathe with a newfound vitality. Fields that had once been barren now sprouted green shoots, and rivers that had run dry flowed with fresh, crystalline water. The people, too, carried a sense of hope that had been absent for far too long. Whispers of the hidden realm and the heroes who had saved it spread like wildfire, and Lyra found herself at the center of it all. Yet, for all the joy and renewal around her, a quiet ache lingered in her heart, a reminder of the price that had been paid. Kael's absence was a void she couldn't fill. Every step she took, every decision she made, was shadowed by the memory of his sacrifice. She threw herself into the work of rebuilding, channeling her grief into action. Villages that had been ravaged by the spreading decay now flourished under her guidance, and the people began to look to her as a symbol of hope. But Lyra knew she couldn't carry this burden alone. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, she gathered a small group of villagers and began to share the story of their journey, the trials, the sacrifices, and the unwavering belief that had carried them through. Her words resonated deeply, sparking a renewed sense of purpose in those who listened. For the first time, Lyra saw the power of Kael's legacy taking root in the hearts of others. Far away, in the hidden realm, Tarin walked among the luminous spires and shimmering pathways, her connection to the land deeper than ever. She could feel Kael's presence everywhere, in the gentle hum of the realm's energy, in the soft glow of the crystalline structures, even in the whispers of the wind. It was as though he had become part of the realm itself, a silent guardian watching over it. Tarin often found herself speaking to him, her voice carrying on the currents of the realm's energy. Though she received no answer, the sense of his presence brought her comfort. She knew he was there, not as he had been, but as something greater, a force of balance and protection. The bond between the two worlds grew stronger with each passing day. In Lyra's world, the people began to speak of the hidden realm, not as a distant myth, but as a place of hope and renewal. Stories of Kael's sacrifice and the realm's beauty spread, inspiring others to believe in the power of unity and selflessness. Meanwhile, in the hidden realm, Tarin worked tirelessly to ensure that the balance Kael had restored remained intact. She trained new guardians, strengthened the realm's defenses, and even began to explore the possibility of forging a deeper connection between the two worlds. For Lyra, the idea of the worlds being united one day was both comforting and daunting. She knew it would take time, effort, and trust, qualities that had been hard-earned on their journey. But as she looked out over the thriving fields and bustling villages, she couldn't help but feel a flicker of hope. The road ahead was uncertain, but the foundation Kael had laid was strong. His sacrifice had not only saved their world, but had also planted the seeds for a future where both realms might stand together, stronger than ever. And so, Lyra carried on, her grief intertwined with a fierce determination to honor Kael's memory. She knew the journey was far from over, but with every step, she felt his presence guiding her. The bond between the two worlds was growing, and though the path ahead was uncharted, Lyra was ready to walk it. For Kael, for Tarin, and for the countless lives that depended on her, she would continue to fight, not just for the world they had saved, but for the future they had only begun to imagine. The days passed in a rhythm of hard work and quiet reflection for Lyra. She had thrown herself into the task of rebuilding, her hands calloused from labor and her mind focused on the future. The people looked to her with a mix of gratitude and awe, their faith in her unwavering. Yet, despite the progress and the growing sense of hope around her, a part of her remained restless, as if waiting for something she couldn't quite name. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and the sky blazed with hues of orange and purple, Lyra found herself standing alone at the edge of the village. The air was still, the kind of stillness that made her feel as though the world itself was holding its breath. That's when she saw it, a shadowy figure emerging from the trees, its form shifting and shimmering as it approached. At first, her hand instinctively went to her sword, but something about the creature gave her pause. Its once menacing presence was now subdued, its glowing eyes softened by a faint, golden light. The creature stopped a few paces away, its form dissolving into a swirl of dark mist that coalesced into a small, glowing orb. Lyra reached out, her fingers trembling slightly as she touched it. The moment her skin made contact, a wave of warmth washed over her, and a voice familiar yet distant filled her mind. Lyra. It was Kael's voice, soft and steady, carrying with it a sense of peace she hadn't felt since his sacrifice. The orb pulsed gently in her hand, and fragments of his essence flowed into her, carrying with them a message, images and words intertwined, a vision of the hidden realm, now vibrant and whole, and a quiet reassurance that his sacrifice had not been in vain. The balance is restored, his voice echoed, but the work is not yet done. You are the bridge between our worlds, Lyra. Trust in yourself, as I trusted in you. Tears welled in her eyes, but she blinked them away, her grip tightening around the orb. The weight of his words settled over her, not as a burden, but as a calling. Kael's presence lingered in the air around her, a reminder that though he was gone, his spirit lived on, not just in the hidden realm, but in the choices she made, the lives she touched. The orb dissolved into light, its energy fading into the night, but the message it carried remained, etched into her heart. Lyra stood taller, her resolve renewed. She had always been a fighter, but now she understood that her role was greater than she had imagined. The work Kael had begun was hers to continue, and the bond between the two worlds was hers to strengthen. As she turned back toward the village, the shadowy creature lingered for a moment before fading into the night. Its purification, a gift from Kael's sacrifice, was a symbol of the change he had brought, not just to the realm, but to everything it touched. Lyra's steps were steady, her mind clear. She knew that one day, the path might lead her back to the hidden realm. But for now, her place was here, among the people who needed her, building a future worthy of Kael's legacy. The road ahead was uncertain, but Lyra walked it with purpose, her heart guided by the echoes of a friend who had given everything to make this world, and the next whole once more. Lyra's travels took her to every corner of her world, places where the scars of decay had been replaced by the vibrant signs of renewal. It wasn't long before she began to notice something remarkable. Stories of the hidden realm were spreading, not just as tales of legend, but as a source of inspiration. People spoke of strange encounters, fleeting visions of shimmering light, and fleeting whispers that seemed to guide them toward acts of courage and kindness. These weren't mere coincidences. They were echoes of the hidden realm's influence, rippling through the fabric of their world. One by one, Lyra found others who had been touched by these experiences. There was Eamon, a blacksmith whose forge inexplicably began to produce weapons, imbued with a faint, glowing light that seemed to protect those who wielded them. Then there was Mira, a healer who discovered her ability to mend wounds with a touch, her hands radiating the same golden energy she had seen in her dreams. Each person she met carried a piece of the hidden realm within them, a spark of its power that had been passed on through Kael's sacrifice. Together, they formed a network of protectors, united by a shared purpose, to preserve the balance Kael had fought so hard to restore. As their numbers grew, so did Lyra's role among them. She had always been a warrior, fierce and unyielding, but now she found herself stepping into a new kind of leadership. Her strength wasn't just in her blade, but in her ability to inspire others, to remind them of the hope that had carried her through the darkest moments of her journey. She began to see herself not just as a fighter, but as a guardian, a beacon of hope in a world that still bore the scars of its past. One day, her path led her back to the Whispering Gorge, the place where her journey with Kael had truly begun. The jagged chasm stretched out before her, the wind carrying its eerie whispers as it always had. But this time, the voices didn't bring doubt or fear. Instead, they carried a faint, almost comforting hum, a reminder of the bond she and Kael had shared and the challenges they had overcome together. Standing at the edge of the gorge, Lyra felt a surge of clarity. She had come so far since that first, uncertain step into the unknown. The doubts that had once plagued her were now replaced by a quiet confidence, a belief in the path she had chosen. The wind swirled around her, carrying with it a whisper that felt almost like a voice. "You are not alone," it seemed to say. Lyra smiled faintly, her hand resting on the hilt of her sword. She knew the journey was far from over. There would be more challenges, more battles to fight, and more lives to protect. But she was ready. The network of protectors she had built was a testament to the power of unity, and the legacy Kael had left behind was a reminder that even the smallest spark of hope could light the way forward. As she turned away from the gorge, the wind at her back, Lyra felt a renewed sense of purpose. The road ahead was uncertain, but she walked it with her head held high, her heart steady. She wasn't just fighting for her world anymore, she was fighting for the future Kael had believed in, a future where both realms could stand together, stronger than ever. And with every step, she carried his memory with her, a silent promise to honor the sacrifice that had made it all possible. In the heart of the hidden realm, Tarin moved with purpose, her every step a testament to the bond she had forged with the land. The ethereal beings, once distant and enigmatic, now worked alongside her, their luminous forms weaving intricate patterns of energy into the realm's defenses. Together, they fortified the crystalline spires and shimmering pathways, preparing for the unthinkable, the return of the ancient evil. Though the seal was strong, the memory of its malevolence lingered, a reminder that vigilance was their greatest weapon. Tarin's connection to the realm deepened with each passing day, the land's energy flowing through her like a second heartbeat. It was in these moments of quiet reflection that she began to notice something extraordinary, a whisper in the wind, faint but unmistakable. At first, she dismissed it as a trick of her mind, a longing for the friend she had lost, but the whispers persisted, carrying with them a warmth and familiarity that she couldn't ignore. It was Kael's voice, soft and steady, offering guidance and reassurance. Though he was no longer with them in the way he once was, his presence was undeniable, woven into the very fabric of the realm. His words were not commands but gentle reminders of hope, of unity, of the strength they had found together. For Tarin, it was a source of comfort and resolve, a reminder that Kael's sacrifice had not been in vain. As Tarin worked to rebuild and protect the realm, others began to gather around her, drawn by the same sense of purpose that had brought her here. They came from all corners of the hidden realm, their unique abilities and perspectives adding depth to her efforts. Among them was a young guardian named Elen, whose connection to the land rivaled Tarin's own, and a skilled artisan named Kael, who crafted tools and weapons infused with the realm's energy. Together, they formed a new generation of guardians, united by a shared vision of balance and protection. The bond between the hidden realm and the outside world grew stronger with each passing day. Through Tarin's efforts, the realm began to send ripples of its energy into the world beyond, touching the lives of those who carried its spark. Lyra, in her travels, began to notice these connections. A village healer whose hands glowed with the same golden light Tarin had once wielded. A farmer whose crops flourished despite the harshest conditions. These small miracles were signs of the realm's growing unity, a testament to the work Tarin and her allies had done. As Tarin stood atop one of the realm's towering spires, gazing out at the shimmering landscape, a thought began to take root in her mind. What if the two realms were meant to be more than just separate worlds? What if one day they could stand together as one? The idea was both thrilling and daunting, a vision of unity that would require patience, trust, and a willingness to bridge the divide. But as she listened to the whispers in the wind, she felt a quiet certainty. Kael's voice, though faint, carried with it a message of hope, that the work they had begun was not just about protecting the realms, but about bringing them closer together. With renewed determination, Tarin turned her attention to the task at hand. The road ahead would be long, and the challenges would be many, but she was ready. The hidden realm was no longer just a place of refuge. It was a beacon of hope, a reminder that even the greatest divides could be crossed. And as she worked alongside her new allies, she couldn't help but feel that Kael's presence was with them, guiding their steps and lighting the way forward. The journey was far from over, but for the first time, Tarin allowed herself to imagine a future where the realms stood together, stronger than ever before. The air in Lyra's world had grown restless, as if the land itself sensed the stirring of something ancient and malevolent. One evening, as she stood beneath a sky painted with the colors of twilight, a sudden wave of dizziness overcame her. Her vision blurred, and the world around her seemed to dissolve into a swirl of light and shadow. When her sight cleared, she found herself standing in the hidden realm, but it was not the vibrant, luminous place she remembered. The once glowing spires now flickered weakly, their light dimmed by a creeping darkness. The air was thick with tension, and the whispers of the realm carried a tone of urgency she had never heard before. In the distance, a massive rift tore through the sky, its edges pulsing with an ominous red glow. From it spilled tendrils of shadow, writhing and spreading like a plague. The ancient evil, once sealed away, was breaking free, its power surging with a vengeance. Lyra's heart pounded as the weight of the vision settled over her. She knew what this meant. The realm was in peril, and the world she had fought so hard to protect was once again at risk. When the vision faded, Lyra was back in her world, but the urgency of what she had seen lingered. There was no time to waste. She called together the protectors she had inspired, Eamon, the blacksmith whose glowing weapons had become symbols of hope, Mira, the healer whose touch could mend even the deepest wounds, and countless others who carried the spark of the hidden realm within them. They gathered in the heart of the village, their faces a mix of determination and fear. Lyra stood before them, her voice steady despite the storm of emotions within her. "The hidden realm is in danger," she began, her words cutting through the silence. "The ancient evil we thought was sealed away is breaking free. If we don't act now, it won't just destroy the realm. It will consume our world as well." The protectors exchanged glances, their resolve hardening. They had faced hardship before, but this was different. This was a battle that would demand everything they had. The journey back to the hidden realm was fraught with challenges. The path, once clear and luminous, was now shrouded in darkness, its energy unstable. Yet the protectors pressed on, their unity their greatest strength. Lyra led the way, her every step guided by the memory of Kael's sacrifice and the hope that they could succeed where he had given his life. When they reached the heart of the realm, the sight that greeted them was both awe-inspiring and terrifying. The rift loomed overhead, its sheer size dwarfing the spires that surrounded it. The ancient evil's form was unmistakable, a towering figure of shadow and flame, its eyes glowing with a malevolent light. It turned its gaze to Lyra, its voice a thunderous roar that shook the very ground beneath their feet. "You cannot stop me," it bellowed. "Your efforts are futile." But Lyra stood firm, her hand tightening around the hilt of her sword. "We've faced worse," she said, her voice carrying a quiet confidence. "And we're not alone." Around her, the protectors rallied, their combined energy forming a radiant barrier against the darkness. The battle that followed was unlike anything they had ever faced. The ancient evil's power was immense, its attacks relentless. Yet, the protectors fought with a unity and determination that seemed to defy the odds. As the battle raged, Lyra felt a familiar presence, a warmth that flowed through her, steady and unwavering. It was Kael's essence, his spirit intertwined with the realm itself. His voice echoed in her mind, soft but resolute. "You are stronger than you know," it said. "Use my power and seal the evil away once and for all." With a deep breath, Lyra stepped forward, her hands glowing with the golden light of Kael's essence. The protectors formed a circle around her, their energy merging with hers as she channeled the power of the realm. The light grew brighter, its brilliance piercing the darkness. The ancient evil roared in defiance, but its power was no match for the combined strength of the protectors and the legacy of Kael's sacrifice. In a final, blinding flash, the rift was sealed, the ancient evil's form dissolving into nothingness. The realm's light returned, its spires glowing with renewed vitality. The protectors stood together, their bond stronger than ever, as the weight of their victory settled over them. The realms were forever changed, their fates now intertwined in a new era of balance and hope. Lyra looked out over the luminous landscape, a sense of peace washing over her. The road ahead would still hold challenges, but for the first time, she felt a quiet certainty. The journey that had begun with Kael's sacrifice had led them here, to a future where both realms could stand together, stronger than ever before. And as the whispers of the wind carried Kael's voice once more, Lyra knew that his legacy would live on, not just in the realm, but in the hearts of all who had fought to protect it. The hidden realm shimmered with a renewed radiance, its crystalline spires glowing softly as if in quiet celebration. Lyra stood at the heart of it all, her gaze fixed on the horizon where the rift had once loomed. The air was calm now, the oppressive weight of the ancient evil lifting like a fog, burned away by the sun. Beside her, Tarin stood tall, her connection to the realm evident in the way the land seemed to hum gently beneath her feet. Together, they reflected on the journey that had brought them here, a journey of loss, sacrifice, and ultimately, hope. Lyra's thoughts turned to Kael, his absence still a tender ache in her chest. His sacrifice had not only saved the hidden realm, but had also forged a bond between the two worlds that could never be broken. She glanced at Tarin, whose calm presence had become a pillar of strength for her. "He would be proud of what we've done," Lyra said, her voice steady but laced with emotion. Tarin nodded, her eyes reflecting the soft glow of the realm. "He gave us the chance to build something better," she replied, "and we will." The decision came to Lyra almost naturally, as if the realm itself had whispered it to her. She would stay. The bond she had formed with Tarin, the protectors, and the land itself was too profound to leave behind. The hidden realm had become more than just a place. It was a part of her, just as she was a part of it. "This is where I belong," she said, her voice firm with resolve. Tarin's smile was warm, a silent acknowledgement of the choice that felt right for both of them. As they stood together, the protectors began to gather, their faces a mix of relief and determination. The battle had been won, but the work was far from over. The realms were healing, but the scars of the past would take time to fade. Lyra stepped forward, addressing the group with the same quiet confidence that had carried her through countless trials. "Kael's legacy is ours to protect," she said, her words echoing through the luminous landscape. "We've proven that together we can face anything. Now, let's make sure both realms thrive in the light he helped bring back." The protectors nodded, their unity a testament to the strength they had found in each other. Lyra and Tarin exchanged a glance, a silent vow passing between them. They would honor Kael's memory by ensuring the realms remained safe, by fostering the growing bond between them, and by standing as guardians of the balance he had fought for. The future was uncertain, but it was also full of promise. A promise of new adventures, new challenges, and new stories waiting to unfold. As the light of the hidden realm bathed the land in its soft glow, Lyra felt a sense of peace settle over her. The journey had been long and arduous, but it had brought her here, to a place where she could truly make a difference. And as she looked out over the luminous horizon, she knew that Kael's spirit was with her, guiding her steps and lighting the way forward. The story of the hidden realm was far from over, but for now, it was a story of hope, of unity, and of a future shaped by the sacrifices of those who had dared to dream of something greater.